is required by the state of Georgia in conformance with the BEAD conditional waiver for the letter of credit. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Wade on our team to kind of just do kind of a run through of the waiver, the requirements, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have related to this.
Perfect. Thanks, Jessica. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm assuming all of you on here have actually applied under the BEAD program. And so you might recall the questions that were asked of you in the application, one of which were of the performance bond and letter of credit, which you would be utilizing for the BEAD program. And then additionally, an attestation and certification of the understanding of the requirements of each of those with respect to the NTIA's letter of credit waiver. Do understand it is a little bit, it's a lot of information to take in it all at once. And so I want to kind of break this down a little bit. First and foremost, initially with the BEAD NOFO, there was the requirement for the standby letter of credit of at least 25% of the subaward to satisfy that initial requirement. And the letter of credit was also tied to the legal opinion from a counsel that under the bankruptcy proceedings, that letter of credit would not be treated as part of the subgrantee's bankruptcy estate. But because those requirements were pretty restrictive, especially for smaller non-traditional providers, the NTIA then produced what you now know as that letter of credit waiver. Just a high level here of kind of what the original one looked like and what the waiver or adjustment was made. For the alternative to the letter of credit, you may utilize a performance bond under the updated waiver. The issuer eligibility here, now letters of credit may be issued by credit unions as opposed to the bank meeting the certain criteria that was under the Weiss rating initially. For the performance bond amount, that stayed the same with the value of 100% of the subaward because it was utilized as an alternative to the letter of credit. The bankruptcy opinion letter now, if a performance bond alternative is used, the requirement for that entity's legal counsel to have the bankruptcy opinion letter is waived. And then the biggest one, I think that is kind of sparking some of this confusion over the percentage of the performance bond or letter of credit is really the reduction over time or the milestone steps that each ISP would meet or entity would meet in order to kind of lower that threshold. Initially, under the initial NOFO, the letter of credit had to remain at 25% of the subaward at all times. The waiver then provided that you could do gradual reductions for the LOC or performance bond as long as the project deployment was meeting certain milestones outlined by the state. So once those are achieved for the terms that the eligible entity will sign with the state, the eligible entity will sign with the subgrantee, then those performance bond letter of credit percentages can then be reduced. I'll go through the waiver momentarily too, so you can kind of see what they outline there. But then for the flexibility that this really provided, finally for the initial requirement and then the waiver, initially the states should enforce all the letter of credit requirements per the NOFO, but then the waiver really provided a lot of flexibility for the states to determine what direction they wanted to adopt with regards to the waiver, including the milestone-based reductions, choosing the percentages they want to lower based on meeting those milestones and setting those milestones within that waiver structure. This is taken directly from the waiver, and I can pull this up in a second too, but this is essentially the 2.1 through 2.4 that is outlined under the waiver. So 2.1 really basically says you can utilize credit unions, as I mentioned in that table there. 2.2 goes straight into subgrantee's option to utilize performance bonds instead of letter of credit. So that's pretty straightforward. Where we start to get into the percentage lowering or the reduction here is 2.3. If you recall from our previous office hours and FAQs that we established along with the state and published, we did indicate that we will be conforming to the waiver. So under 2.3, or the reduction of the letter of credit performance bonds upon meeting completion of the milestones, it indicates that the requirement in no event, however, shall the letter of credit have a value of less than 25% of the subaward amount is waived on the condition that the requirement that the subgrantee obtain a new letter of credit in a reduced amount upon achievement of specific development milestones that are publicly specified by the eligible entity and applicable to all subgrantees subject to this requirement. Where a subgrantee chooses to utilize a performance bond in lieu of a letter of credit under section 2.2 above, again, this one here with the option to actually use that, referencing that section, eligible entities shall also have the option to reduce the amount of the performance bond by a commensurate amount as the subgrantee meets same service milestones. So then essentially it gives some examples of the ways that in which the eligible entities could specify that the subgrantee may obtain a new one if they meet certain milestones. And here it talks about upon demonstrating that there's 40% of build out, they could lower it to 20%. Subsequently, if it meets 60%, they could lower it to 15% and so on and so forth. So again, this section 2.3 is really the root of the allowability for the state of Georgia to then reduce the amount of letter of credit or performance bond upon completion of milestone. However, if you refer back to the original first portion of this for the letter of credit requirement, initially for LOC and performance bond, it has to be 25% and 100% for the initial amount, respectively. So again, 25% for letter of credit initially until you meet those milestones and the state allows you to reduce those individual ones. And then, I'm sorry, for the overall letter of credit. And then 100% if you are utilizing a performance bond as the alternative to the letter of credit. Again, so the last bullet point of the waiver, I think this is also causing a bit of confusion just because of the way it's written. And again, there's so much information under the waiver. But 2.4 indicates that a subgrantee option for an alternative letter of credit or performance bond percentage. And under this, it states that the initial letter of credit for 25% of the subaward, or in the case where you utilize a performance bond consistent with section 2.2, again, we've already kind of gone through that, allow the initial amount of performance bond to be lower than 100% of the subaward. Here it does not indicate 10% at all, but it indicates that it could be lower if or where the eligible entity issues funding on a reimbursable basis. Reimbursement is for periods of no more than 6 months, or the subgrantee commits to maintain a letter of credit or performance bond in the amount of 10% of the subaward until it has demonstrated to the satisfaction of the eligible entity that it has completed the build out of 100% of locations to be served by the project or until the period of performance of the subaward has ended, whichever occurs first. And this is where that 10% is occurring here at that last bullet point. However, if you note in the waiver, it also gives a sub-bullet footnote for 10. And if you look under that sub-bullet, it clarifies, for the sake of clarity, the option to reduce the amount of performance bond by a commensurate amount as the subgrantee meets the same service milestones described in section 2.2 or 2.3 may be applied to may not be applied to a letter of credit or performance bond obtained under the section 2.4. So again, it cannot be lowered in those tiers. The state has indicated again in the FAQs as well as the office hours that it will utilize the milestone method of repayment for reimbursements to then allow subrecipients to lower the letter of credit or performance bond based on meeting those milestones. So hopefully this clarifies that, again, the initial letter of credit and performance bond, as indicated in the applications, needs to be 25% or 100%, depending on which one you use. And then the state will allow the lowering of that based on completion of the milestones outlined in their program. So I know that was a lot of information to cover in a very short time, but again, we wanted to hop on here just because the office has been fielding a lot of questions with regard to the initial requirement up front. So Jessica, do you want to open it up for any questions?
Yes. So I know that, again, I know that's a lot of information, but based on the questions that we received following our email, we figured that it would be better to get everybody together to make sure that we could clarify the requirement. But with that, based on obviously the information that Jen has shared, does anybody have a question that they would like to share with the group?
Yes, this is Alan Global of Blue Ridge Mountain Electric. And listen, I apologize in advance for me being so ignorant about this. So please be gentle, Ms. Wade. But all right, so you used the term subaward. So if there was a $5 million total cost of construction and the award was for $1 million, is 1 million the subaward?
It is the award that is provided from the state to you,
Okay,
yes.
so we would be required to have a letter of credit that would be $250,000 in that example.
Correct, based on the subaward amount.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for my simple mind. So
No, that's a great way to break it down. Sometimes you got to back up. That is a lot. I'm telling, like, we understand the confusion because that waiver is the way that it references each section and all of that. It's a lot. So totally
Okay.
understand.
And then that $250,000 amount in my example could be reduced based on meeting subsequent milestones, the rules that would come out. And it's all right. So I think the other question that I did have, and our people that would provide letters of credit asked, is that would you allow for an annual renewal of the letter? In other words, if the term of my project is 3 years, they're asking, do I have to get a 3-year letter of credit, or can I get a 1-year letter of credit and updo it every time annually? And I'm assuming by the way you've answered with the milestones, then that's certainly feasible, even if I don't meet a milestone.
Correct. And I'm going back through here. I believe it. I think I read through this too, where it talks about each year that it maintains the. I'll pull it back up in the guidance and put it in the chat. But yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Christopher?
Yeah, just to clarify, you may have touched on this and I missed it, but if you have multiple awards, does the state desire that to be in one letter of credit or bond or separate per project?
It's a good question. I don't think that we've clarified that yet. And David, I don't know if you have any feedback on that from other states that we worked with, but.
Yeah, I think per project is the best approach, just so that we have an isolated documentation trail for our audits and the files. We obviously track everything by GA number, so I think it's important to have a unique letter for each project. But obviously, you know, the state can evaluate whether or not there's some efficiencies to be gained with one letter, and as long as the bank could provide it, I think it could be acceptable. But the default position that I've seen in other states is that we're going project by project, so GA number would be the driver.
Understood. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I see that we've got a question in the chat. Will a template for the letter of credit be provided? Jen, is that something that do you think that we would be able to help with, or that other states are providing as well?
Yeah, we can certainly provide examples of what we've seen as well. Yep.
Jen, this is Pamela with Brightspeed. So I did send a question over, and thank you for this opportunity to have a discussion about this. I think the language that the industry worked on as we worked on this programmatic waiver with NTIA was designed to give additional flexibility and to eliminate, some of the burden of the capital requirements, particularly where this is a reimbursement program. Is Georgia's position then, because you're doing milestone reimbursements that may be more often than every 6 months, that the additional flexibility in 2.4 doesn't apply? Because most states that I've talked to are reading it like, if you agree that you're not going to seek reimbursement every more often than every 6 months, and you agree that you're going to keep that 10% performance bond without trying to reduce or step down, those are the two conditions that allow you to reduce it in the beginning beyond the 100%. So you're only tendering a performance bond of 10% because you're actually expending the money first and then seeking reimbursement after, and it's no more often than every 6 months.
I'm not sure I understand your question entirely, but let me back up for 1 second with the reimbursement language. So as you may recall, under programs like state fiscal recovery and CPF that the state has done, those ended up also being fixed subawards. I think the language here is extremely confusing, especially from a lifelong grants person like myself. When you start talking about reimbursement, I want to be very clear that these are all fixed subawards. And what that does is it gives each state flexibility to conduct the repayments, I will say the word repayment, in a way that aligns to this reimbursement style that NTIA has set forth in their guidance. So while you're seeing the term reimbursement in Georgia, as opposed to other states, we are not saying you need to prove to us that you've spent X amount of dollars and we're going to reimburse you for all of that. It's a true traditional fixed subaward, regardless of the spend on the grant for that particular thing. So we're trying to align to the reimbursement method or style, rather, that NTIA has outlined, utilizing a fixed subaward on top of that. So then the milestones that would kick in then would be based on, and they are also outlined if you've gone to the state's publication of their final proposal, compliance and monitoring plan and manual, those milestones are outlined there, right? And so you'll have things that are outside the actual build, like planning and things like that, that you can actually get reimbursed for when you meet those certain milestones, right? So I just wanted to back up to explain the reimbursement thing. I'm not sure that answered your question entirely. So if you want to rephrase it to, so I can get to your question. So sorry.
No, it's helpful context, right? Because I always think about fixed subawards is a different classification versus the documentation you have to submit to get money back from the grant award, right? And then the cadence upon which you get that money back from the grant award. So I think we're trying to navigate through what NTIA's programmatic guidance says about reimbursement periods that apply to when 2.4 can be used, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I see what you're saying now. So I can say, so the periods of 6 months or less, the way that the state has established milestones is so that we don't get past 6 months, right? We're not looking for you to go and build and then hold all of your requests for repayment until the very end, right? And setting the milestones up that way, we are trying to offer a more convenient method of repayment so that you're kind of going, so it helps the cash flow, right? So we're not trying to withhold that until the very end of it to say, show us that you've got everything, is serviceable, right? If that makes sense. And so that's why those milestones were built out.
It does. And I appreciate that. I mean, cash flow is important, right? Especially when we've got big programs that are very capital intensive and we're fronting the money. But if a provider wanted to take advantage of 2.4 and say, I'm okay getting reimbursed every 6 months so that I may lower this surety output requirement down to a 10% level that I hold firm versus 100% of the funding on a performance bond. Why isn't that allowable?
So if you look at bullet point 10, for the sake of clarity, the option to reduce the amount of the performance bond by a commensurate amount as the subgrantees meet the same service milestones described in sections 2.3, which the state is doing, may not be applied to the letter of credit or performance bond obtained under section 2.4. So in doing the milestones, and Jessica, you could speak to this too, based on the state's decision to conduct the milestone-based method of repayment, that is essentially saying 2.4 is not allowable, do it with those milestone method, right?
Yeah, and again, the other reason why we decided to stick with kind of this method is that's what we're already doing with our current programs. We've got that established, and again, that's working well. And so that's why we decided to continue that structure into BEAD, just because that's something that our current grantees in our other programs are currently actively working under milestone-based payments.
Okay. Thank you. I understand your position.
Yes, Tyler?
I have a question. Good morning, guys. Do we have to have on the performance bond, do we need to have every one of them completed before we can sign it? Or can we say, okay, we get done with one count and we go get another performance bond kind of deal and keep rolling it over? Or do we need to have all of them ready to go at the signing?
I can take that if you want me, Jessica, that's fine. It's prior to entering into the sub-grantee agreement. So before you even sign for each project area that you're awarded, to actually get past the agreement, the sub-grantees have to provide the state with an irrevocable standby letter of credit or their performance bond in the values that we just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
And I do want to highlight too, I'm not sure if this is something that that has been a question, Jessica, for the inbox for you all, but in addition, the sub-grantee must provide the state with an opinion letter from legal counsel stating that the proceedings under the bankruptcy code, the bankruptcy court would not treat the letter of credit as property of the winning sub-grantee's bankruptcy estate, as I outlined earlier, but that also at the same time, prior to entering into the sub-grantee agreement, that general counsel letter needs to be also submitted.
Let's see, based on a couple of the other questions we have in the chat, yes, we will be sharing the slides. We're also recording the session today so that way we can provide that in the event you want to go back and rewatch it, or for any potential sub-grantee that was not able to join us as well. We did get a question, can a county help bond the performance bond? David, I think if you could maybe speak to that. I think that based on NTIA, I think there's only kind of a select approved list, even based on their update, of financial institutions that can provide the letter of credit or the bond, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, that's correct, Jessica. If you dig into the waiver, you can see this reference to Department Circular 570, which speaks to companies holding certificates of authority as acceptable sureties. I'll post a link to that department circular in the chat, but essentially that circular links to an approved list of sureties that Treasury has produced. And so only those who are listed on this website under this list would be approved sureties for this bonding.
Sorry, I'm talking on mute. We are getting a couple of questions about the 14-day requirement. So based on the state's notice of funding opportunity, sub-grantees have 14 days to sign terms and conditions. We believe that 14 days begins when the state sends out the terms and conditions to you to execute. We do not have a clear final proposal approval date yet. And I think most states are kind of in that same boat based on your question. And then will there be a transition to V7 of the fabric for BEAD awards prior to grant execution? I have not personally heard anything from NTIA about upgrading to version 7 of the fabric. Obviously, we did just, they don't like this word, but a true up of our data for the benefit of the bargain round to shift to V6 along with the latest BDC data. And so everything that we have seen was that the benefit of the bargain round was supposed to be per NTI's FAQs using version 6. And unless anybody has heard something that I have not yet, we have not been told that we have to switch to version 7. See, Beverly?
I think you're still on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. Hi. All right. So what I'm gathering from my takeaways is you will provide an LOC template that we can use.
Yeah, we can provide an example for sure.
Okay. And then for the legal opinion, is that going to just be a standard legal opinion? I noticed, Jen, I believe you said it needed to make the statement that we would not treat the LOC as part of a bankruptcy, blah, blah, blah. Is that just standard language, or is there something you can provide for that?
we don't have anything to provide for that, so I would utilize standard language from your legal counsel.
Okay. And then my last is, did I understand correctly? There's going to be a 6-month reimbursement schedule. I know you said your milestones will be at 6-month increments, but that is like the soonest you could get any sort of reimbursement? No, I understood that. Okay.
No, ma'am. So the milestones will look a little different for everybody because if you go back to, again, what we published, and I believe it was the compliance monitoring plan or the guide, the manual, they outline those milestones and they will look different. But what I was indicating is the way that the state has set those up was to provide that the ISPs or the subgrantees can have a faster method of reimbursement, right, under fixed sub award. So that way you're not, again, doing all of this and waiting until the end. So it allows for the cash flow. So it's not you can only get reimbursed every 6 months. The milestones were just created in a way that allows you to not have to wait, 6 months or a certain amount of time to be reimbursed, but rather based on the milestone completion.
But are you saying that will be the requirement though? That is how this will work?
Based on the milestones.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Great. Looks like Alex is next.
Thank you. So quick question, because it's been so long since we've done the application, so I can't, and forgive me for not remembering. Did you have to select whether or not you chose a performance bond or letter of credit? And if you did, are you able to provide whichever one is better for your business?
You did have to select, just so we know which one, so that we would then be able to ask the follow-up question about the percentages that you're going to utilize. Jessica, I think that's a state issue, if they need to switch something, prior to entering into sub-grantee agreement, as long as they are providing it in the required amount with the appropriate documentation, et cetera, if the state would accept that.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think we had an FAQ about that. So let me look and I can follow up with you offline. But I think that as long as either a letter of credit or a performance bond is provided at the time of executing terms and conditions in the appropriate amount, then I think that meets the program requirement.
Perfect. And after this, I'll log in and look at our application to see what we did. It's just been so long, I can't remember. But thank you.
Sure. So it looks like we've got Sarah.
Hi, thank you. Okay, yes, one of my questions was about the flexibility per individual project and if the office was open to combining any of those projects into one security requirement but it's good to hear that maybe we could have some conversations about what is needed per project. Is that what I'm hearing? That maybe one project could be treated differently from another?
Are you asking with regard to your performance bond and letter of credit or with other requirements?
Yes, yeah, and what we chose initially in the application process.
Yeah, I think she was just saying, we believe that there's an FAQ, and Jessica was just indicating we'll take a look at the FAQ and then see if there's anything in there. But as far as what you have chosen in the application versus what you end up, if you chose performance bond, for example, and want to go with letter of credit because it makes a better business decision for you all, I think Jessica indicated they might consider that. But with regard to putting them all together and combining them, I think that's something we'll definitely want to get back to you on to work with the state to see if that's something that makes sense or if we need to basically put them on separate project
Sure.
LOCs.
Okay. Thank you. And I do have one more question just for clarity. And this is a complicated subject, but going back to that 10% flexibility, I want to understand, so this is not an option for any subgrantees, or when would it be one?
And do you want to take that one?
Yep, sure. Based on the guidance that I just read through again, hang on, let me get back to it because I went back to the sureties. There we go.
I think I had interpreted initially to be that 10% just could not be lowered any further. And I didn't see it as precluding the project to still be milestone based as a fixed amount subaward.
So there's a bullet point on the footnote 10, for the sake of
Yes.
clarity. The option to reduce the amount of the performance bond by commensurate amount of subgrantees meet the same service milestones described in 2.3 may not be applied to a letter of credit or performance bond obtained under this section 2.4.
Yes.
But it defers back to the states, because the state has the flexibility to determine which method they want to utilize. And so, as Jessica had indicated too, the decision to basically do it based on the milestone lowering, as soon as they meet the milestones, was determined based on prior programs that we've done as well, like state fiscal recovery funds and CPF.
Okay, understood. So we should not consider this as an option as we're planning. is
The
what I'm hearing.
initial, the
Okay.
initial letter of credit should be 25% of the subaward, 100% if you're utilizing a performance bond, and you will have the ability to lower those based on the achievement of the milestones outlined by the state.
Got it. Understood. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Alrighty, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We will be sharing the slides that Jen showed earlier, along with the recording of this webinar. And again, please always feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. But thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully this provided some clarification related to the requirements, and certainly happy to answer any questions you have offline if you have any follow-up questions. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.